Great. Okay, let's go ahead and get started then. So welcome back, or welcome if you're just logging on for the first time to the special edition of Race in the PR Classroom, which is an extension of our Super Saturday series, which this year is Super Friday, and today is being held on Thursday. And we had this special call for the Great Ideas for Teaching, the gift session. And so we've got these 6 presentations, and I want to thank Institute for Public Relations for sponsoring this and for sponsoring the award for the top gift submission. So let's just go ahead and get started. I'm just going to go in order of the spreadsheet that I have, and as a way to piggyback on the first panel, I'd like to start with Adrienne Wallace and Gina Luttrell for their gift, Shifting the Paradigm, Improving Student Awareness of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Efforts through Public Relations Campaigns. So I will kick it over to y'all.
Sure, thank you. Can you see my actual big, I always confuse myself because I have so many screens going, but maybe that's also part of my problem.
You did better
than anyway, here we are, right? So Gina and I, and this is the wheel that keeps on giving. I'm sure that by the end of this one, you'll have had your fill of the wheel. But Gina and I, it's been a while since we've decided to create something that is like a tool, right? And understanding that how you talk with students about application, they love rubrics, tools, checklists, boxes, I mean, whatever you can give them to improve or create a more flawless sort of integration. And we wanted to make that as easy as possible. So we did also a couple of pre-tests in our campaigns classes where we discovered sort of where the shortcomings were in our students and their learning process of this. And so the students felt like DE&I elements were important to campaigns, and they should be in all curriculum, and they are open. And so this gave us the perfect window. However, we discovered they are not prepared and they feel unconfident in this. They're lacking any type of the ability to take one thing and make it another, or to actually apply anything. And so understanding where they were and where we wanted them to go, we decided to create a tool that improves the shortcoming and open up a deliberate space for diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations. And then also an actual tool to provide like algebra, put the number in for X and solve backwards so that they could see it in action frontwards and backwards. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Gina.
Sure. So can you go to the next
our wheel? Nope, we're just still at our wheel.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot we had edited this down. So thank you. So as you can see, this really comes from the fact that rather than making DI add-on elements to strategic campaigns, we need to make a conscious decision to put DEI at the forefront. And so this was the beginning of what we started calling diversity first approach. So at the center of the wheel, there's 6 core spokes: national origin, age, qualities, physical qualities and abilities, gender, race, and ethnicity. And then on the outer layer, there are 17 additional qualities there, from religious beliefs to education, language, sexual orientation, and so much more. The idea really is not to incorporate, oops, I think you went too far. But anyway, that's okay, we'll stay here. So the idea isn't to incorporate every aspect of this wheel. When we teach this in the class, it's to say, okay, where in the center, 2 or 3 areas, and then on the outer edge, what are some areas that you can use? So now, sorry, to the next slide. So this assignment is analyzing a communications campaign. So in the first step, what you really want to do is give students a recent case study or campaign to read. And you can pull those from PRSA, you can pull those from Page Society, any type of campaign that really fits with you and your teaching preferences. And then what you want to really ask your students to do is read the case study completely and then have them highlight and make notes that illustrate direct connections back to diversity, equity, and inclusion while they're reading this case study. And then you can also encourage them to go online and look at some of the digital aspects. So Instagram accounts, websites, blog, and again, connect it back, but using the wheel the entire time to say, oh, okay, here, this is where I see this is where I see this is content that says this. In step 2, we're looking for them to apply. So then what we ask our students to do, we take that wheel, and we've created a template, which we can share with you. It's just a blank wheel. And so we ask them to, look at the center of the wheel and say, okay, which areas are represented from the center, and then which areas are represented from the outside. In step 3, we're looking for our students to assess this. So ask your students to look up the diversity and inclusion policy of a company. So they've done all this research, they've analyzed it, and now they've applied the DI wheel. Now what you want them to do is say, okay, is this company walking the walk? They're saying that they're diverse. Do we see this in their campaign? Yes or no? And then you can have a really rich discussion about when things match up and when they don't match up. So that happens as part of your class discussion, right? So open the floor and talk about any of the findings through the case study. And then finally, have them reflect on their own diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so you can do this in one of 2 ways. In this particular assignment, we've asked them to write their own DE&I statement, and then they can put that on their e-portfolios. Or I've done it another way where I have them do a reflection paper, and I pose a few questions, and I have them then connect it again back to what we learned in class. I personally like to do this at the very beginning of the semester so that it becomes rote for them. It becomes something that every time we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I can pull out the wheel and they understand the concepts that we're talking about. Adrienne, how do you introduce this in your class?
Yeah, I stick it right in the beginning. I try to do as we're going through the process of the campaign in my campaigns class, we do stop and reassess like you would micro evaluations throughout the course of time too, so that we're making sure that our research is reflected in this and that our action plan is reflected in this, and of course our evaluation as well.
Yeah, and if this is something that you can get your entire department to start to use, then it's reinforced in every single class. So students start to it becomes second nature. That's that diversity first. It just becomes second nature. Oh, where does this fall within this conversation or this assignment? Yeah.
So we have 3 major areas of outcomes as it results with the application of this wheel. And most of them are sort of exasperation from students saying, like, I just can't believe that that we haven't done stuff like this before, or I can't believe this isn't being taught throughout additional classes. And in my curriculum, we don't have a diversity-centric class for public relations. It's incorporated, or should be incorporated, in every single class. But one of the things is just like showing us the need. That was one of the big takeaways for us. Again, in practice, just the ability to practice using a wheel, using a tool in order to sort of reinforce these ideas. And understanding that it's a process and sort of not a destination, I think is something that we have highlighted in our classrooms. And then finally, obviously, curriculum application. And I feel like sometimes, unfortunately, you have to do like sort of this classroom test before you can go to administration and say, like, this is actually important. Like, the students also think it's important. It's not just like what's popular or du jour for our society right now, but really bringing this into this, like, for example, us, the School of Communications, and Regina Newhouse School, and just understanding that the need is there and that we can fill it, and that we have to, and that's part of our obligation through curriculum. So in conclusion, Gina's going to take us through a couple things here.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, carry it forward to all your additional courses. I think that we talked about that. If you can start this as a small discussion, even an introduction in an intro to PR class, and then carry it through to capstone. Like I said, I'm using it, if you were in the last session, I'm using this in my PR leadership and management class. So there's lots of, there's lots of ways that you can apply the wheel. It doesn't just have to be for a writing assignment or just have to be for a campaign. It is versatile, and that's why you can immerse it throughout your entire curriculum. It does help with, obviously, campaign development and improvement, and that starts from pulling your teams together if you're in a campaigns class, all the way through to the research and the execution. It helps generate holistic change. I mean, we've talked about this. If it's something that can be incorporated in all of your classes and your faculty members, can get on board with using this approach, then it's seamless. And then obviously we hope to see impression or improvement in the PR profession. We actually had a PR agency take this assignment and distribute it to her team and had them look at their last campaign to see how was it really effective. And so I thought that that was kind of cool because we're using this in the classroom, and then here this PR practitioner reached out to Adrienne and I and was like, I ran your assignment in my morning meeting. So I thought that was pretty good. We did have a question from Jessica in the chat. It says, are there examples of students? And I can afterwards pull up a couple of my students' portfolios and share that for you.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. And Donna had a question as well, but for the sake of time, let's move to the second gift, and then hopefully we can return to these, but we'll note the questions in the chat, and hopefully we'll be able to share some of this great content afterward. But thank you. All right, so moving on to the next one. On my list, I've got Chiaoning Su, and your presentation of rewriting the racial script, why PR goes wrong and how to make it right.
Are you able to see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chiaoning Su from Oakland University in Michigan. I'm an assistant professor there in the PR program, also the advisor of the very newly established PR SSA chapter that just established last year. And something about me, I come from Taiwan. Before my academic career, I actually worked in the PR industry for years. I worked for Ogilvy PR, political campaigning. And so now, like coming here to the US, being a minority myself and still learning to be a minority, because when I was in Taiwan, I was the majority, and now being in the minority and teaching a very dominantly white institution, I think that's why I am very, very interested in racial sensitivity, cultural inclusive approach, and I try to add that into my teaching as well. So my idea today is how do we rewrite the racial script in the field of public relations? And I almost feel like after Gina and Adrienne's conversation, I almost feel like, oh, this is such a great opportunity that I can apply their will into my own teaching. But let's look at this slide first so that you probably understand what I'm saying better. So this is a slide that I use in my class. This is what I call the timeline of promotional disasters. I'm sure we are all very familiar with cases presented in this timeline. From 2015, Starbucks asked their baristas to write race together on the cup to initiate a conversation with the client, right? And then Pepsi used Kendall Jenner as the spokesperson and then produced this TV commercial in a very like Black Lives Matter kind of idea. And then we have Dove to promote their soap. They ask models, African American model to begin with, in this darker shade t-shirt, and then change into the white model in a lighter t-shirt, almost imply that there is this progression of beauty and how there is a standard of beauty, and that is very much defined by the whiteness. And then in 2018, we saw Dolce & Gabbana in their effort to win the heart of the Chinese consumers. They actually use a Chinese model to eat Italian food with chopsticks, which looks ridiculous. And I think until this day, the Chinese consumers are still boycotting Dolce & Gabbana. So these are real events. These are real promotional disasters, as I would like to call them. And I think showing these examples, it is a great way for us instructors and students to learn that it is more important than ever in the higher education classroom that we need to establish a race-centered and cultural sensitive teaching pedagogy so that we can instill that sense of inclusivity, diversity, and civic responsibility in our students. So to achieve that goal, this is the assignment that I typically use in all of my PR classes. It's very straightforward, it's very simple. It can be done in a 100-minute kind of time framework. So if you are teaching like a 50 minutes class, you can do this in 2 classes, or if you are teaching like a 3-hour class, then you can have it being done in 1 class. But the overall idea is that we will discuss a few examples to begin with, and then we will have a lecture. I will spend about 20 minutes to talk about the racial makeup of the PR industry here in the US specifically, but also globally, and then to just use that as a way to encourage students to think about when we don't really have diversity in the industry itself, what will be the implication for PR campaign decision being made? What are the implications of lacking diversity in the industry itself? And then build upon that lecture, students will be formed into groups to discuss, assign real world cases. Here, I think real world cases are extremely important because this is a way for students to see that every decision made has a physical, reputational, and social political consequences. Like, we are not just talking about theoretical concepts, something very philosophical or abstract. We are talking about decision made with real consequences. And that's why I think use real world examples are the best to facilitate this activity. So students will have 15 minutes to discuss those cases, and then we will have about 20 minutes as a group for students to present their evaluation, their analysis, and I hope at this point students are very, very aware of the multicultural consumerism that they are facing and their responsibility to create a campaign that really respond to that market. But we don't just stop here. I think what we need to do is to go a step further. So here is what I would typically do. I would ask students after their first presentation, I will ask them to go back to their groups and then rewrite the script. For example, you think Kendall Jenner's TV commercial is problematic. If you are the producer, if you are in the team, how would you redo the TV commercial? What would you do? How can you right the wrong? Right? So I will give them 15 minutes to really talk about it, and then we will use the following 20 minutes to share their creative thinking. And in my previous classes, some students say that, oh, instead of using Kendall Jenner, they will use real social activists from Black Lives Matters to replace Kendall Jenner just to have this sense of authenticity, or they would use like documentary footage instead of like a more manufactured footage as a way to make the message more authentic. And for the Dolce & Gabbana one, a lot of my students say that instead of having a Chinese model use chopsticks to eat Italian food as a way to talk about how the two cultures meet together, why can't you do like a creative recipe and then combine Asian ingredient and Italian ingredient as a way to showcase the beauty of two cultures, right? So it's not to ridicule anyone. It is really an effort to celebrate the beauty and the how these two cultures can work together. So this is what we can learn from that 20 minutes presentation, and how students are forced to devise a solution to right the wrong. I think that's a very, very critical step for them to take. And then we will use the last 10 minutes to regroup and have a wrap up class discussion. And I think this is a time for every instructors to once again re-emphasize the importance of racial inclusiveness and sensitivity in the process of developing strategic messaging. So overall, I think this is a very straightforward, again, very straightforward. But now if I can combine Gina and Adrienne's idea, I think that would really add another layer of depth into this activity. But I think this is a very simple, straightforward activity that can be incorporated in a lot of PR courses, from more introductory level to more advanced classes. I think everybody can find a way to work this into your teaching. And the way I envision the learning outcomes are three. One is for students to be able to critique the problematic racial representation perpetuated through everyday PR practices. I think that's the first learning outcome. And then hopefully from there, because they were asked to devise a solution, hopefully from that experience, students will learn to produce positive, purpose-driven PR campaign. And finally, because they're working in a group setting, I think that's where they will learn to apply inclusive strategies to group problem solving, which is also very similar to the real industry. So this is my idea, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chiaoning. I really appreciate it. These are fantastic ideas, so thank you. So moving on to the next person. Let's go with Candace, if you're able to share your screen.
The reasons I use Instagram is because it's seen as the cool assignment, like I just mentioned before. So students definitely like to do discussions, then they always like to share their opinions, but usually we do them on whatever LMS we're using, whether it's Blackboard or Canvas. Our university uses Blackboard, so it doesn't always look the best in terms of the user face. But when we take it to Instagram, it kind of lowers the stakes for the students. They feel more engaged. They feel like it's an assignment that they want to do. At first, I can admit they're usually apprehensive, but when the chat is over, they absolutely love it. And I'll share with you the breakdown in a second. It encourages community building. So it's showing, first of all, it's like multi-level. It's community building in our classroom. And then it's also teaching students how to community build on social media. So I like it because it's something they can directly take after we use it. After we have the Instagram chat, they can literally go and apply it to their internship, their job, what their consultations or whatever they're doing. And then also it encourages civic engagement. So we, have a role as professors to guide students into ethical discussion, especially ethical discussion in public relations. And right now is a prime time for us to be talking about race and social justice as it relates to our society and also our field. I personally am African American, so race is something that I bring with me as soon as I step into the classroom. But there are, many wonderful ways for us to, talk about race and social justice in the classroom, as we've seen from the prior gift presentations and those to come. But the reason why I like Instagram for this civic engagement is because our students are immersed in social media. All they do is talk about stuff online. That's like their activism, right? Some would call it slacktivism, but that's their digital activism. And so by us having these discussions about race and social justice online, we're also teaching students how to engage in these discussions. We need to not just limit it to talking face to face, but because they're so engaged on social media, we can also have a hand in helping them understand how to go about having these discussions in a civil way. So here are the assignment sheets that I use. And just to briefly go over it, I don't grade for the content. I grade for the actual number of post answers and replies that they do. So they have to, I usually do about 3 questions and I give them about 15 minutes each. And then they have to reply to the question. If it's Q1, they have to reply A1, just like with the Twitter chat. And then they have to reply to 3 of their peers. And I give them about 15 minutes for each so that they can do all of that. And I found over the years, I've been doing them since 2016, that that's kind of like the sweet spot for engagement. And the reason why I think the students also like it is because I'm not like grading their like whatever they're saying. I'm not like, oh, that's wrong. I might, you know, hop in the chat and say, well, did you think about this? Did you think about that? But for the most part, I try to let them have a genuine environment and discussion among themselves. And so that leads to the possibility for them to open up a little bit more because they're not worried about, will what I say be right or wrong? So here is an example of one of the questions. So this was posted a few weeks ago during an ethics edition of one of my Instagram chats for my graduate students. And I just asked the question as if they were a public information officer for Louisville Police Department, how would they manage and balance work and the stance for advocacy during such a crisis like with Breonna Taylor, with the verdict of Breonna Taylor. And I talked to some of the students on the back end because I was a little, sometimes when there's really heated like cases and situations, I get a little worried about what people might say, but then I draw that fear back because they're already online talking about it anyway. And this is one of the really good ways for us to, you know, have like a more governed discussion about it. So they really seem to appreciate it. Here's another one that intertwined advocacy and professionalism in public relations. Here's another one where I talked about colorism in social media, and I intertwined it with research. And whoops, here's another that related to social justice in the sports communication world. I have two articles in wrapping up. I have two articles that I've written about it. The first one at the top, and I can send the links to anyone. The first one at the top is walking you through how to host an Instagram chat. And then the second one at the bottom is talking more about the learning outcomes and the importance of how it can be applied in the PR classroom. So thank you all.
Awesome, thank you, Candace. As you can see in the chat, this is fantastic. This is a great idea. Awesome, thank you. So we're right at 10:30 and we've got 3 presentations left. So if the 3, I hate to ask the remaining 3 people to just maybe keep it to like 7 or 8 minutes, so we'll have a little bit of time at the end for questions. But let's continue with Christina Van Essen. And I see that your label is Kiki. So you go by Kiki or Christina?
Yes, I go by Kiki.
Okay, great. It's all yours, Kiki.
Perfect. Let me see. Am I sharing the screen right now? Perfect. All right, thank you all for having me here today. I'm talking about stereotyping and especially about opening up the conversation about the establishment and impact of stereotypes on society and looking at it through advertisements. So I have an activity that consists of 7 different steps. And before getting into the steps, I just want to highlight some of the objectives that I have with this specific activity. So this activity is meant to reflect on the stereotypes that we hold and to understand and explain the relationship between stereotypes and our unconscious biases that then impact the way in which we are using these to judge people and to unconsciously impact our actions, and how we should use advertisements to not play into these stereotypes, and how to critically think about how we should use these advertisements that we're creating to hopefully work against the establishment and the maintenance of different stereotypes. So I've highlighted different steps. In 7 different steps, I'll go through how this activity works and what materials you would need to be able to perform this activity. So first, I start with handing out small note cards to students with the same size, and I ask them to write up stereotypes about different groups of people. So I typically use 6 different groups of people: white, Black, Asian, Latinx, men and women, but just depending on which groups are more prevalent within either your classes, the area that you're situated in, you could change these up to really fit that with your students and with the situation that we're in. So these are some of the stereotypes that my students previously have come up with. And I'm asking them to use stereotypes they've either heard before, that they have told before, that their parents have used, or other different things that they have seen or have been portrayed to them. And generally they would come up with a whole bunch of different stereotypes. So from there, I asked students to put their stereotypes in a bag. I'm asking them not to put their name on that to just make sure that we keep an environment of safety and security for students. And I'm going around to have students pick other people's stereotypes. So this way they actually get confronted with some other stereotypes that are out there, and get to read what other people actually have thought or believed, or maybe have heard at least, about other people, and have students pick about 1 or 2 stereotypes, and write them up on the whiteboard. So the whiteboard is projected right in front of them, which eventually creates a huge board with all these different stereotypes organized by different groups. And for students, this is really confronting. So I make sure to usually leave about 4 to 5 minutes to really have it kick in, that these stereotypes are like a description on what sometimes their racial and gender representation is, and to really start understanding that these are thoughts that are out there on people and that they impact people's day-to-day lives. So from there, I have a discussion with them, and some of the potential discussion questions that you could use and that I have used is: how did you learn about these stereotypes? Do you identify with any of the stereotypes in the category that you consider yourself in, which really helps students to humanize these stereotypes and to really understand that these are actually about human beings? And how could these stereotypes be harmful? So about that last question, I really go into that a little bit further by showing them a clip of the documentary Zwart als Roet by Sonny Bergkamp, which is about, in which she's showing 3 different men from 3 different racial backgrounds steal a bike in a busy park. And the way in which they are perceived by the different bystanders is really showing that people identify with the white bike thief and consider the other 2 men as very dangerous. So how these stereotypes are influencing our actions on a day-to-day basis really starts kicking in. From there, I have students reflect on some of the stereotypes that are portrayed through advertisements, and the first 2 are showing commercials that are showing racial stereotypes that are maintained through the commercials. The Love's commercial is actually putting males in a heroic position for doing childcare, or typically thought of as female duties. And the last 2 commercials are using these stereotypes to try to break them. So like a girl is trying to challenge the statement that girls cannot do certain things that boys can do, and the Procter & Gamble, the talk is about addressing the day-to-day conversations that that happen in Black families to prepare children for the potential dangers out there in the world. And from there, there's a second discussion, or if you don't want to use commercials or other commercials, you could use some visual representation. So for instance, Mr. Clean portraying whiteness as cleanliness, and sort of the male depiction as strength. The Coolest Monkey in the Jungle from H&M, which was problematic, and the Re-Civilize Yourself commercial from Nivea, which really has a lot of problematic aspects there with representation of the Black body. So in a discussion, I really try to have students think about what sort of different traits we should keep in mind when creating advertisements, how should advertisements be used to break stereotypes, and how we can shield from getting a counteractive response like the Love's commercial, and whether advertising breaking stereotypes should be used if companies are not proactively fighting against racial and gender against the discrimination of racial and gender minorities. So you can change these up a little bit too, just depending on what some of the outcomes are that you would want to reach with this activity. So this was my activity, and if you've got any questions or want more resources, feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Awesome, great, thank you, Kiki. That was fantastic. Very nice. Moving along, Arhlene, you are up. So Arhlene Flowers presenting on race and inclusivity in language, lessons for writing for PR students. I think you're muted, Marlene. Arhlene, sorry.
Now you can hear me.
Yes, actually, yes, there you are.
Can you hear me? Can you see the document? Wonderful. My discussion and lesson focuses on the D&I wheel with the language part of it that Adrienne and Gina had discussed earlier. So this is an exercise that I use in the writing for PR class on race and inclusivity in the use of words. As we know, words can be very powerful. They can heal, they can harm, they can divide people or put them together. And this really has a few key goals. One is to help students become more culturally competent, as well as to help them apply respectful and bias-free language now and in their future careers, to make them more confident communicators in society. The language is diverse and it's fluid, it's always evolving. So I do like to review a lot of outdated terms that all you have to do is watch an older movie. I mean, terms like Indians used for American Indians or Native Americans, the term Eskimos for indigenous people. And there are a lot of others, like many different categories, some of them extraordinarily condescending. But language evolves, and I do focus on contemporary language that treats people with respect, with dual heritage, race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, nationalities, as well as address areas of disabilities, addictions, and mental illnesses. I use what I consider, and I think we do in the industry, reputable sources. I know everybody, practically everyone, whether a practitioner or a professor, uses the Associated Press style book in PR writing. It's interesting that AP has truly evolved to offer much more extended sections on gender and sexuality, race-related coverage and terms, and other categories that are listed there. There is a wonderful supplemental resource that the San Francisco State University created. It's free online. Also, there's a new published style book. But it's a compilation of journalistic sources from the Asian American Journalists Association, GLAAD, National Association of Black Journalists, and many, many more. And it gives really good explanations, and it also covers how these words have evolved. Now, this teaching process has three main steps. I give students a homework assignment called a reflective exercise. It's non-graded. And I ask students to find an example in the real world of problematic language. And I wish it's sad how many examples exist. And it can be Twitter, it could be an interview, a speech, it could even be a language that was used in an advertisement. And I ask students I give them a few questions to evaluate it and look at the problem, also look at how they would improve it if they were responsible for it. And then I use that as a springboard for step 2, where we do an in-class discussion about our findings. I use online polls as well as we have an open discussion. And then I review the existing resources and how to use them effectively. and also do an in-class activity, which could be on Kahoot or just a handout, where I ask them to find and evaluate keywords looking at the resources. And the third part, I do a quiz in class. It's not that long, but I allow them to look at the resources. It also could be closed book, and then review the answers with the class, particularly those that were widely incorrectly answered. And I find that these 3 key steps do help reinforce it. When I first started it, I left out the first step, but I do think that reflective exercise helps them understand how problematic language can be. And if, it can result in boycotts, firings, loss of reputation, etc. The targeted learning outcomes are to really understand the evolution of language. And again, looking at it from many different dimensions, as I have listed there. Also to apply preferred usage, again, from reputable resources. And to identify biased and outdated and disrespectful language. I know a lot of the students have discussed how their difference in generations, some of the terms that their grandparents use, they wince over because it's in a time warp. And also to really, the key thing is to apply inclusive language in all forms of communication, whether they're communicating with traditional media, writing speeches, or posting on social media. So I realize I went through that quickly, but I know you're running out of time. Anyhow, thank you for allowing me to share my gift with you today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Arhlene. That's really important in terms of language, to drive that discussion and have them think actively about that. So thank you for that. All right, last but certainly not least, we'll turn it over to Melissa Dodd and LaShonda Eaddy, who'll be talking about advocate mentorship for undergraduate students of color, a moral imperative for the public relations classroom and industry. So Melissa and LaShonda, if you want to take it away.
All right, thanks so much, Dean, and thanks to all the prior presenters. I think we'll be able to catch up on the time a little bit because we have just this beautiful poster slide because ours is more of a programmatic recommendation than an assignment. And so really this gift responded to a call by Harrison Lee 2019. I'll share the full gift submission document with you in the chat shortly. Harrison Lee said that university faculty have a moral imperative to fight systemic racism and other forms of oppression for students of color who are scholars in training at primarily white institutions. Ultimately, affirmation of students of color in the academy will lead to increased numbers of graduate level students of color who pursue careers in the academy, thereby increasing the number of faculty of color who may then also serve as role models and advocates for future students of color. I want to pull out the words, the importance of the words, a moral imperative. A moral imperative means we are compelled to action. We are compelled to action to mentor and to increase the number of graduate students of color, and therefore we hope faculty of color in the academy, especially in the public relations discipline where we face our own issues with diversity both in the profession and the academy. And so I probably don't need to tell you this or even show you this, but if you look at the table included on the poster, the statistics there are just staggering. The U.S. Department, these are all from the U.S. Department of Education's National Center for Education Statistics. You can see the first is the 4-year undergraduate graduation rates within 6 years of entry. So they measured across the cohort from 2010 to 2016, and they found that it varied substantially. And you can see from the line by racial and ethnic group. 74% of Asian students and 64% of white students had graduated within 6 years. whereas only 40% of Black students and 54% of Hispanic students had graduated during that time frame. This contributes to a lack then of diversity in graduate programs. Again, the NCES reported that graduate student enrollment is comprised of 64% white, 14% Black, 10% Hispanic, which further contributes to even greater disparities in representation than of faculty, of full-time faculty of color. And so especially, I'm sure I don't need to tell you this, but the data about full-time professors in the academy found that they are 56% white males, 27% white females, 7% Asian males, and Black males, Black females, and Hispanic males each represented only 2% of all full-time professors in 2019. So again, a moral imperative to say the least. More so, as you know, the public relations profession in particular faces its own lack of diverse representation, that is, identities that differ from the professional norm of white, cisgender, heterosexual males. The Harvard Business Review found the public relations industry is 87.9% white, 8% African American, 2% Asian American, and 5% Hispanic or Latinx. We know a wealth of scholarly research conducted over the past 30 years in our discipline has identified the inequities in the industry according to gender or race, but a lack of research on the intersection of both is noteworthy. And this is despite the wealth of research that demonstrates competitive advantage for diverse organizations. So this GIF then develops what is a what we are calling a multicultural undergraduate teaching apprenticeship program designed for public relations students of color and other historically marginalized students. I want to stress the apprenticeship aspect of this. Previously, when I was serving an administrative role, I had developed what was simply an undergraduate teaching apprenticeship program. The program was mentorship focused, but it was not focused on students of color or the moral imperative that we're discussing today. The program faculty received it well, but faculty, there was a lot of discussion about what an undergraduate teaching apprentice was versus assistant. In an apprentice relationship, you are mentoring and advocating for the student, whereas in an assistant position, you might be they might be paid a stipend to conduct grading, to take attendance in your classroom, and so on and so forth. So I originally developed that way, and then I saw the real opportunity where I know faculty wanted to engage with and mentor students. And in this case, then, if we apply that to marginalized populations and students of color, the hope is that we can encourage and see through these students of color from the undergraduate level to the graduate level, and then on into faculty careers. We as public relations educators have access to students of color at the undergraduate level. We can reach out to them and serve as a mentor to them. If you, some of the research that I've bulleted here, is that undergraduate teaching apprenticeships, the research shows, this is not necessarily for multicultural, but the research shows increased agency and efficiency, personal empowerment, leadership and mentoring skills, and stronger candidacy for graduate teaching assistantship. Advocate mentor outcomes, specifically for students of color, have resulted in demonstrating confidence, validating students of color's intellectual abilities, affirming the value of students of color to the program, department, and university, serving as a champion for students of color for teaching and research opportunities, and ultimately enhancing student of color's professional network and professional development. I want to turn this over to LaShonda, my wonderful collaborator to tell you a bit about the specifics of the MUTA, the MUTA, I suppose we could call it, program. But briefly, I just would like to note the quotes in the middle here. One of the most important influences to a student's pursuit of graduate education, if not the most important, is having a faculty mentor during a student's undergraduate education. And this is especially true for students of color. And then racial inequality in graduate programs is perpetuated by the gross underrepresentation of faculty of color among the ranks of full-time professors and the racialized experiences of graduate students of color. So thank you. LaShonda, can you take over?
Yes, thank you. And to continue to talk about the program, as Melissa has already stated, it's very, very important to emphasize that it is an apprenticeship versus just a normal assistantship. And so because that is so important, one of the things that we need to emphasize about it is that it is mentorship and on a very intense level. And so the commitment on behalf of the advocate mentor, the faculty member, it requires a lot, and it has to be a genuine investment, because in many cases, it may also require you to step outside of the normal requirements or responsibilities and roles that you would have for your other classes and responsibilities. So in addition to being a mentor for the students in the program, it's important that faculty also serves as allies and also ensure that the students who are participating are in fact growing and developing towards an ultimate goal of joining the academy. And so, excuse me. And so when we talk about the actual roles for the faculty advocate mentor, we came up with these roles here that you'll see at the bottom. And first is an advocate. So not only do you have to mentor and spend time with the students, but you also need to advocate for them, because oftentimes, especially in PWIs, that is really necessary. And coming from or being, having been a student of color at PWIs for each of my degrees, I definitely understand why that is important. And so that's an important role for the advocate mentor. And then also ensuring that the time, that you have the time to invest that's adequate so that you can fulfill these roles, and also to help the students learn, so to serve as a teacher to help them learn about academe, and also about the institution, and also about the discipline in general. And then kind of connecting with that, you also serve as a connector to not only other professionals within the institution, but also other professionals in the discipline that you think might be good contacts for your students. And then protector. And when I look at this, at first, I think it might seem kind of scary or like a really big responsibility. And it is, because in some facets, you will be protecting your students who are in the minority at your institution. But it is also important that the faculty advocate mentor is careful not to try to become a white savior, because that also, of course, has negative ramifications. And so I think Nikki is going to be sending out our actual paper, but this also includes basically everything that you would need to start this program at your institution. We've provided a course schedule, also the sample self-reflections for the students, also a Canvas mock-up of what your course website could look like, also readings for both the students and the faculty's members who are participating. So a lot of good information for anyone who's interested. And I think that's it for now. Melissa, did you have anything to add?
No, thank you so much, LaShonda. And I think we have even maybe left some time for a couple of questions for Dean and Tina. I did share in the chat a link to our full document with all those appendices that LaShonda mentioned. I'll share it again just in case it got lost. But otherwise, thanks so much for being here. We welcome any of your questions.
Great, Melissa and LaShonda, thank you. That was wonderful and so important, as a lot of the comments in the chat have emphasized. So I think we actually have like three minutes, probably a good idea maybe to take a break for between now and the third and final session for today. But I would, before, if anybody's going to log off, if you just presented, please make sure to send materials to me and Nikki, and at least to Nikki, to make sure that we can send these out to all participants, because we've had a lot of requests as you've presented, as everybody has presented, for your slides, documents, resources, and support. Thank you all for wonderful presentations. We'll take like a short break for a couple of minutes, and then we will have our third panel. Thank you so much, everybody.